Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noam Raydan, and it's a pleasure to have my panelists here. We have 1 hour, and after that, everybody can go and have lunch. So I'm gonna begin with Dr. Abbas Kadhim, and then I'm gonna proceed to the other panelists. Please listen carefully. Prepare your questions because later on I'm going to open the floor for questions. This panel is titled Knowledge Economy and Sustainable Development. We saw previous panels focusing on technology, focusing on e-governance, and they also spoke of challenges. We cannot stop there, but we have to move into a very important sector, which is the knowledge economy, sustainable development, and the role of education here. So I would love or like to begin with Dr. Abbas Kadhim. Please, I'm going to give you the chance to comment.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the invitation. Thanks to the Iraq Energy for this important forum, and that has been going on a great trajectory since its establishment back in 2012, when His Excellency Dr. Lu'ay Al-Khatib was working on the founding of this forum. This panel is talking about two topics that are very important and particularly important to Iraq. And one of them has to do with the knowledge economy, and the other is sustainable development. And I will get to knowledge economy as a concept and what it means to Iraq. But maybe on the sustainable development, if I can start with that, is to really refer us to the United Nations goals for sustainable development or sustained development. And the United Nations has set a number of goals to accomplish by 2030. We're hoping that around the world we will accomplish a great level of development on 17 areas. And I think this panel, even though it touches on the forum itself, indeed, touches on all of the goals of the sustainable development by the UN. But particularly, this panel is closer and directly related to goal number 4, goal number 5. Goal number 4, of course, is quality education. Goal number 5 has to do with the gender equality and accomplishing gender equality. Number 8, which is another one that is important, it is the decent work environment and growth. And number 9, which has to do with industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and also the reducing of inequality, goal number 10. Now, as you see, number 5 and 10 talk about equality or inequality. And the reason why the UN put those in two separate goals, first for importance of reducing inequality, but also because number 5 deals with the inequality that has to do with gender and the status of women around the world, and particularly in a region like ours. But inequality does not only relate to gender inequality, but there are so many inequalities in society: geographical, ethnic, education levels, social inequalities, even inequalities based on disabilities, and so many other things where some of them need active legislation and also sustained effort to accomplish that. And these are directly important, and it is good to see that many people that I speak with in the Iraqi government have those goals on their minds. Particularly the Prime Minister mentions them all the time when we talk to him. Also, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, in fact, is having it as a requirement by the diplomatic corps to really pay attention to those and follow the international developments on them, and also other cabinet members. And that is very encouraging. So what is knowledge economy? Knowledge economy is something that is a concept that is really not new. The concept was coined back in the 1960s, 1969 to be exact. But it is also a concept that is becoming new every year or maybe every day, given the way that the world is moving on development, on technologies, on innovation. So what the founders of this concept, especially the economists who thought about it in the 1960s, they had something in mind as what it means to be knowledge-based economy or knowledge economy. But today, in the age of the internet, in the age of the mass communications, all of the other developments, we do mean other things by it, as we will see. But in general, the basic concepts of it is that it is an economy where there is the use of knowledge to create goods and services is the underlying concept of an economy like this. The understanding that jobs and work is more related and dependent on knowledge and skills, and that the main capital in an economy like this is knowledge, rather than other forms of capital that we knew it in classical economies. So what we see here is that there is an important role for the human capital, but not just human capital, but well-trained, well-educated, well-skilled human capital. And that is a departure from the classical economies, the agrarian economy, where the use of manual labor, or the industrial economy, where the use of mass production, but still the human capital and the labor force remains largely unskilled or limited in skills. In a knowledge economy, we have the skills and knowledge as universal as possible. That's why it is called post-industrial economy. How does that relate to Iraq when we talk about an economy that invests a lot in innovation and requires a highly skilled workforce, and also the use of technology as a feature of this economy? The Iraqi story, in a way, it is encouraging as an optimist case, but also it's a story of heartbreaking. Iraq has witnessed a great stride towards higher education, towards better education, towards educational institutions that were the envy of the region in the 1960s and 70s. And then it began to deteriorate, to reverse most of the accomplishments that we had in that era. Even the 80s, which was an era of war, upheaval, heavily saturated in dictatorship era, but still it benefited from the remnants of that great education in the 1970s and in the 1960s. But the depletion of that educational system during the sanctions era, and also in the post-2003, with the lack of stability and lack of security, we had a different sort of almost a reversal of what was accomplished in those years. And also we have seen in Iraq some unique characteristics. For example, I always say that Iraq is a country where maybe the only, that country that I know of, where the mothers are better educated than their daughters. The mothers who are my generation, I grew up in a time when we had universal education and we had compulsory education. I went to the university in just before the mid-80s, and we had more females than males in the universities. 52% of the university population, student population, were females. That was reversed in the era of late 90s and the 2000s, mainly because of the lack of enforcement of the universal education, the lack of enforcement of compulsory education, and also the quality of education itself. Females were the biggest victim of that because families, if the state does not enforce the law, families tend more to keep the girls at home. And also it became a necessity in the 2000s because of the lack of security. Given the nature of Iraqi society, they'd rather keep the girl at home than risking her going out and not coming back. And that, again, breaks our hearts when we see it. So let me conclude with a couple of things about Iraq when it comes to knowledge economy and also sustained development. Iraq has a large human capital. We just heard in the past 2 days. Of course, we don't have a census, so all of these numbers are given out of what we think. It's more intuitive. But we talk about 38 million people. 50% of these people are under 19 or under 20. That is a very young population. You could look at it in one of two ways. It could be a huge burden on a state, and also it could be turned into a great opportunity if you invest in education and in the skills and in getting those people ready to be in an international market that can use knowledge economy and that can really be one of those countries that provide goods and services, or services to be exact, and there is a great revenue. We in the United States have all a computerized office environment. You have a technical problem, you pick the phone, call a local number, and the person who answers it and solves your problem happens to be in the Philippines or in India or in other countries. It is an intelligent use of the human capital by training them and having them. It beats the idea of sending workers outside and depend on remittance of their labor. You keep your families intact, and you keep also your people in the country, and you generate revenues from that kind of globalized economy. And that is a great opportunity, but it needs a lot of work. The number of people, and we are adding 1 million to this young population every year. It needs to be, you need a lot of planning and a lot of smart utilization of this. Second is the establishment of an education system. Iraq does not need to build an education system. It has an education system. However, it is in a way depleted in certain areas and it's outdated. So all you need to do, unlike many countries that don't have an infrastructure, Iraq does have it, but it needs to maintain it. It needs to bring it. And also you need to modernize education to meet the requirements that I just mentioned, to turn your human capital into a knowledge economy, human capital. Then also there is, Iraq has an important element that can give us optimism. Iraq is a democratized society, or democratizing society, moving fast towards accomplishing a democratic state. And that is very important because if you look at the World Bank requirements or pillars of what a knowledge economy is based on, it stipulates a legislation and also a state institutions that are friendly to knowledge-based economy, and that is accomplishable, and it is already in Iraq. You need to have not only the knowledge, but also the environment where free knowledge can be the basis of innovation. We see in the world, there are countries where there is freedom of education, freedom of thinking, where innovation is much higher than countries where they have the knowledge, but there is a stifling economy. One last word I will leave you with is that when we talk about knowledge-based economy, we should not restrict it to the sciences, to the computers and the communications and cell phones and all of that, but also we need to have a revolutionized study of the social sciences and the humanities. Much of Iraq's problems are social problems, are psychological problems. So yes, we need medical knowledge, we need technical knowledge, we need also even pure sciences. But I think, and the reason I bring it is because in the past years, the philosophy of the government of Iraq is to send scholarships to outside only to study pure sciences and technical sciences, but very limited number of scholarships to study political science, economics, social sciences in the broad sense, and also psychology, etc., with the claim that we can give doctorates here in the country. That's not a good philosophy. You need to do that. Iraq was in the 1930s and 40s, were sending people to Italy, to France, to Britain and the United States to study painting and sculpture and other arts. We need to go back to that philosophy to build a society that is both educated, intellectual, and technically advanced. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas Kadem, Iraq Program Director at the Atlantic Council. You raised very important points, and I saw some people nodding their heads here, so I'm expecting questions for you at the end, and especially women, because Dr. Kadem touched on really interesting issues, so I'm hoping women in the audience are taking notes. Although we don't have women on the panel, I'm going to move to Mr. Steve Tierney, Executive Director at the Canadian Institute on Governance. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Shukran jazilan, mamnoon. So the big question is knowledge critical? Is it important to seek knowledge? And my favorite response to that is written in the Hadith, where Prophet Muhammad instructed, chase the knowledge even to China. So with that, let's talk about chasing knowledge, especially in an Iraqi context. Building a public sector is the route that a diverse number of countries have chosen in order to lead the transformation of their economy. Countries like Singapore, Estonia, Malaysia, Japan, Brazil, India, all started first on their road to modernization through the public sector and building its capabilities. So how does one go about building such a public service? Since 2012, the Institute on Governance has been using international best practices in adult learning and making adjustments for the particular circumstances of Iraq. The result, we think, is a made in Iraq model that will have wide applicability throughout the country. So what are those international best practices in adult learning? First, adults learn by doing. Adults do not learn by listening. I would challenge you to think next Monday what you remember of this conference where you have been listening. And if I were to ask you to take a piece of paper and try writing your name with your left hand, I would just about guarantee that 10 years from now, you will remember having to struggle to do that. That's just an example. It's important when you're trying to build new knowledge and new ways of thinking to actually have people do things. Secondly, too much training is focused on bringing a certain small set of people from diverse teams together, training them and expecting them to go back and then deliver that learning, make a change in their work environment. Modern research in adult learning is finding the biggest challenge is how to develop the essential skills in people to apply their new knowledge in collaboration with others who have not gained the same kind of knowledge that they just acquired. So these two precepts of adult learning suggest that classroom teaching should make use of projects that the participants can directly and immediately apply to their work. It also emphasizes the value of a coach in building capacity. The coach is not there to tell us what to do. The coach's role is to provide support, to ask the difficult questions, For example, what did you learn from this challenge? What do you know about something similar that worked? How could you do this otherwise? And provide encouragement to persevere through difficulties, thus acquiring a concrete sense of how to use this newly acquired knowledge in practice. It is an error process, and we cannot be afraid of making errors. Too often I hear the problems with doing something different. Of course, you're doing something different. Of course there are problems. But as new learners, we're still new to the material. It requires courage, dedication, and persistence, but also support as people work their way through the new way of doing business. Now, in Iraq, there are a number of unique challenges in building capacity, some of which the doctor just alluded to. Iraq was effectively cut off from developments in the rest of the world for a number of decades. Repression under the previous regime and a weak security situation has resulted in between 40 and 60% of educated middle-class Iraqis leaving the country. It has had a long history of working under a centralized command and control structure. Since 2003, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on capacity development for public servants. While there have been some successes, there are many hard questions that need to be asked about the results that have been achieved and how this training is being conducted. It is one thing to train someone on a new skill set, such as, I'll pick line item budgeting, for example. But if it is not recognized by the rest of the team, if it is not supported by new processes, if it runs counter to current processes, or even if it is not recognized later on down the line in a ministry in Baghdad, then the individual will not be able to implement their new skill, and the entire purpose of the training to enable change within the working environment to create a more effective output and service delivery will fail. Finally, a knowledge economy requires a mindset that is flexible and values new ideas and experimentation and does not shun people for failure. This is a significant shift from a command and control paradigm. Our approach at the IOG has been to work with senior officials of the federal, regional, and provincial governments of Iraq to create a Made in Iraq approach to capacity development. This involves 4 learning pillars. First, to involve all 3 levels of government so that they learn together and build relationships. Second, to emphasize learning by doing. Third, to use pilot projects, taking an approach with a small but cohesive team, but an approach that can be scalable to a much larger group and to other provinces. To have regular follow-up, not just to show up for a weekend course, but to be there for months afterwards on a daily basis at the office of the people that you've been working with during the training. We believe that a key part of changing from a centralized to a decentralized mindset is for officials of the different levels of government to learn together as a team. This is particularly important when working on issues related to the transfer of authorities as set out in Law 21. The federal and provincial governments of Misan and Diwania have created committees of teams of federal and provincial officials to work through the technical issues of moving forward on Law 21. The IOG's role in this is to work as a coach, to facilitate questions, to deal with issues such as how can you have co-chairmen? We had a day-long discussion about how a committee did not require just a single chairperson, but that you could actually have 2 or even 3 chair people for a committee. Another example is our work in Misan and Diwania. Again, for over the past 12 months, we've been training over 130 people in each province. We have a finance expert who's been working with them on a daily basis to help them work through all the issues involved in putting together a modern financial management system in those provinces. That person delivers workshops and then follows up for the next 2 weeks on sitting down at the desk of individuals and helping them even put the numbers in the right columns. Again, we followed a similar approach with the parliamentary committees on finance, where we worked recently on helping them draft the new public financial management law, which was just passed. And about 4 years ago, we worked with the Parliamentary Committee on Regions and Governorates on drafting the Second Amendment to Law 21. Again, the role is one of a coach, where the Iraqi colleagues work together to put together a made in Iraq solution, not one that's imported from North America, Europe, or some other area of the world. But returning to sustainability, why does this matter? This method ensures that the training sticks and becomes a norm for the workplace. The aim is for success to breed further change. As public servants at federal, regional, and provincial levels take on more responsibility, the previous culture of command and control will be replaced by one of accountability and results focus. But it's tough work and it takes a long time. The results won't happen overnight. To finish, effective, consistent, hands-on training can bring positive change, but at the end of the day, there needs to be support from the top and the bottom of government and from citizens to realize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thierry. I'm going to move to Dr. Michael Mulnex, please. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good to see you all here. It's late. I'll try to keep this somewhat short. I appreciate being invited to the Iraqi Energy Forum. I'm honored to be standing before you today as the first president of the American University of Iraq in Baghdad, and to give you a brief introduction to what is going to be a superior institution of higher learning, one that will be respected throughout the region and indeed throughout the world. The topic of this particular forum is quite interesting: the knowledge economy and sustainable development. Whether we like it or not, both the agricultural and industrial ages have been largely replaced by the information age. Men and women who work with their hands and their backs are being replaced by robots and a machine-based workforce. To remain competitive in a global marketplace, business and industry simply must adopt the tenets of the knowledge economy, an economy in which growth is dependent upon the quantity, quality, and accessibility of the information available, rather than the means of production. The knowledge economy is the use of knowledge to create goods and services, referring to a high portion of skilled workers in the economy of a region, country, or the world, and the idea that a growing number of jobs require highly specialized skills. Knowledge has become a far more crucial resource than land, labor, or financial assets, thus increasing the font of knowledge with modern universities at the forefront has become the most important consideration in remaining competitive in our world today. To remain competitive, leaders like you must become smarter than ever before. Your very survival is dependent upon the knowledge in your heads, not the muscles in your arms. This is particularly true in the oil and gas sector, where finite resources demand ever creative ways to prosper and grow. As you well know, there's a direct link between educational excellence and a dynamic, healthy business environment and capacity building, which I define as the process of developing and strengthening the skills, abilities, processes, and resources that Iraq needs to adapt and thrive in our fast-paced global environment. Without a strong system of primary, secondary, and tertiary education, a nation simply cannot develop a workforce capable of adapting to rapidly changing, highly technical, and intensely competitive world. To best reform and improve education in Iraq, I suggest that colleges and universities adopt at least some of the basic tenets of an American higher educational system. The basic mission of an American university is to cultivate graduates who are able to think critically and independently, who are able to think on their feet, who have superior verbal, written, and oral communication skills. A growing international trend is observed in undergraduate liberal studies degrees as a foundation for both professional careers and practical education such as medicine, engineering, and law. At universities where a solid grounding in the liberal arts is mandatory, such as at my institution, faculty members challenge students to think beyond the textbook and to write and speak persuasively about issues that matter. As they mature intellectually, students develop a passion for lifelong learning and a growing commitment to creating positive political, social, and environmental change. By liberal studies, we mean the acquisition of knowledge purely for the benefit of intellectual growth, as contrasted with technical skills. The purpose of having a foundation in liberal arts is to provide students with a solid multidisciplinary approach in the humanities, natural sciences, and social sciences, thereby allowing them to pursue careers in education, business, government, healthcare, and more. The primary goal of a liberal studies foundation is to train students to communicate effectively, both critically, thinking, orally, and in writing, to develop skills in problem solving and to imbue critical thinking with ethical thought. Courses in liberal studies give students a broad understanding of various academic fields of interest. In other words, a liberal studies curriculum provides Iraqi students with a base of general knowledge that will allow them to excel in specialized fields of inquiry. The only way we can prepare for the future, for jobs that don't even yet exist, is to develop nimble minds that are comfortable when dealing with different cultures, politics, religions, and more. A liberal education, including, for example, philosophy, psychology, art history, sociology, as well as math and physics, educates the whole person and prepares students to excel in a range of careers, and more importantly, to live lives rich with purpose. A liberal arts education teaches students to learn how to learn and inspires them to go on learning throughout their lives. Integrating liberal studies in the arts and sciences with knowledge focused in specific disciplines will help students cultivate their own intellect and imagination. Students at all colleges and universities throughout Iraq need to become creative and independent thinkers. They need to acquire valuable skills in critical thinking and effective communication across a broad range of academic areas. Without such a broad-based education, students will find it impossible to gain the breadth of knowledge and insights that will help them excel in the global arena. At AUIB, we are establishing a new standard of excellence for education in all of Iraq. For example, a major goal is to transform the way we educate future teachers. As part of our College of Education, we will be constructing lab schools based on the University of Chicago that will educate students in grades kindergarten through 12th grade. This will be the best school of its type in Iraq. We will teach teachers how to teach by observing them in the actual classroom, providing constructive feedback, encouraging interactive teaching techniques, and getting far, far away from the practice of rote memorization. In our College of Medicine, we will construct our own 200-bed hospital and bring the very latest techniques in medical education, nursing, pharmacy, and dentistry to Iraq. Simply put, it is time to end the educational drought in Iraq. It is time for institutions of higher learning in this nation to assume their rightful place at the forefront of innovative teaching and research standards. It is time to put us on the radar screen of the best universities in the world. To do this will require cooperation among all colleges and universities in Iraq, both public and private. Students in Iraq today will enter a global society, and to ensure their success, we simply must internationalize our student body as well as our curriculum, eventually bringing to Iraq the best and brightest students from throughout the MENA region, from Europe, from Asia, from the United States, and beyond. Indeed, as the world grows increasingly smaller, internationalization of our curriculum is not only the smart thing to do, it is the right thing to do. We must ask that our students increase their knowledge of the cultures, traditions, religions, politics, and languages of all parts of the world. We must teach our students to be multicultural and tolerant of all races, creeds, and political affiliations. This type of inclusive education is the best and fastest way to combat extremist groups and is the best and fastest way to bring peace and healing to our often fractured world. And so, how best to bring about a knowledge-based economy? I believe the first step is to have an honest assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of your industries. In a world of finite resources, how best do you build capacity? In other words, how best do you survive? Can sustainability be achieved when supplies of oil and gas, for example, are ever diminishing? Can there be a smooth transformation of the energy sector into wind and solar? Only you know the answer to that. As the writer and educator Peter Drucker wrote in an essay for Harvard Business Review, quote, "Every few hundred years throughout Western history, a sharp transformation has occurred. In a matter of decades, society altogether rearranges itself, its worldview, its basic values, its social and political structures, its arts, its key institutions. 50 years later, a new world exists. And the people born into that world cannot even imagine the world in which their grandparents lived and into which their own parents were born. Ours is an age of just such transformation," end quote. In conclusion, let me just say that ours is the first generation whereby honest work doesn't necessarily mean having calloused hands. Survival is knowledge-based. To go beyond mere survival, to grow and to prosper, means to steep yourselves in knowledge. To outperform your rivals means you have to outthink them. As Drucker said, quote, "Success in the knowledge economy comes to those who know themselves, their strengths, their values, and how best they perform." I wish you all the greatest success with your businesses and your industries in the years ahead. The future is indeed bright if we accept change with open arms by embracing the new knowledge economy. Thank you.
Dr. Michael Melnick, the founding president of the American University of Iraq, thank you very much. I'm gonna actually begin with, I'm gonna ask 3 questions. We still have 30 minutes. And I would like, I'm not gonna ask each panelist a question. I would like you just to answer 2 or 3 of my questions. So I'm gonna begin with a question to Dr. Kadem and Dr. Melnick, because you touched on a very important issue. Iraq has went through a lot of conflicts. It's trying to rebuild itself. Societies are still trying to overcome what they went through. What is the importance in education, in the education sector, and the importance of universities focusing on social sciences, humanities, psychology? A lot of people out there in Iraq, they need to heal. So it is important to focus on sciences, on technology, telecommunication, very important for Iraq to rebuild itself. But what about this very important topic, humanities and social sciences? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you asked this. As I said earlier, there is a philosophy in the way Iraqi officials approach how they allocate their money for granting scholarships to students who go out to the West and other advanced countries to study. And they only are interested in sending people to get degrees in engineering and in medical sciences and also in some natural sciences, with the understanding that we have universities that grant degrees in political science and in social sciences and humanities. That is problematic in two ways. One of them is that it deprives the education community of the cutting edge research and education. We need people to come here and teach in Iraqi universities, having studied the latest of methodologies and also of what has been developed in research in advanced universities, in highly ranking universities. The second problem in that is that it will also reduce the level of competence in the teaching and in the methodologies in the Iraqi universities, because the knowledge that we have continues to be unchanged, and it's almost like a stagnant pool of water. I'm very glad we just heard from my friend Dr. Monix on what his vision is for the university. An American university in Iraq, if set right, and I have full trust in his capabilities of doing this, it will be the yardstick for Iraqi universities to model themselves after. In the same way that advanced universities such as the American University in Cairo or Beirut, especially these two, have done for the education in these two countries. And that is very important. Professors will want to be like the professors of the American universities. Student would like to be like its students. And also the competition between the universities as institutions, they want to be that. There you have something to compare to and to measure yourself to if you are an Iraqi university. That is very important. The other important part of an American university in Iraq is it brings this philosophy of what is the relation between the university and the city. And this is something that is missing in the region. There are certain American universities that opened in many countries and did not quite successfully accomplish their goals because the universities in these countries became castles that are isolated from society. You have to have business being in there. While as we live in America, there is no wall for the American university. It is blended in the city. So there is a flow of knowledge in a two-way fashion. People learn from the university and the university learns from society. And that needs to be the culture here as well. Yes, security and other issues and the culture, but you really need to make a university that changes the identity and the approach and the worldview of the city to be successful. It's not just a place where students pay money and get education and a degree, but a place where it really interacts and it changes the society, both the family, the business, and also the government.
Thank you very much. And here I'm going to give the floor to you, Dr. Monix, please.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting, in my office, I have two administrative assistants, both of them women. Both of them have master's degrees, one in electrical engineering, one in mechanical engineering. They're administrative assistants for me. They can't find work. The interesting thing that when I speak to people, when I speak especially to parents, it is that they do not understand that we require at our institution the first 2 years of study are in the liberal arts. Philosophy, psychology, world history, art history, math, science, physics, of course, as well. But you don't even declare a major in an American institution of higher learning until your junior year. Freshman, sophomore year, you're taking a wide variety of courses. Why? And there are plenty of great universities. I'm not just saying American universities are the best. Of course not. But the model is unique. The model is unique in that the first 2 years, you become a generally well-educated person, as much as you can in 2 years. And of course, you can't become totally well-educated, but what are they trying to do? They're trying to plant the seeds in young people that they will become lifelong learners, that they understand the thrill of reading new material, of reading material that's as difficult to understand in all broad spectrum of disciplines. So that's what's unique. So not until your junior year do you declare, I'm going to major in business, I'm going to major in law, I'm going to major in whatever. And it's really fascinating to watch those first 2 years of students who come in and mom and dad say, especially in Iraq, you will be, number 1, a medical doctor, and number 2, an engineer. Pretty much discussion over, okay? Business is one of the lowest entry-level points, whereas in America, I mean, think of the Stanford School of Business, the Harvard School of Business, my goodness. So we're going to have to transform thinking, and it's going to take, I'll be 6 foot under by the time we get done with this. It's going to take some time, but we have to start changing the model of thinking. Students, those first 2 years, they'll come in saying, I've got to be an engineer. I guarantee you, by the time they declare their major when they're a junior, they're going to be a geologist, a physicist, a sociologist, a psychologist. They will change. They will discover things that they never thought possible. So this is the interesting challenge we have at institutions such as mine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Melnex. Mr. Tierney, I saw you nodding your head, when we were discussing the topic. Do you have anything to comment on it? I have a question for you, but if you have anything to comment on it, please do let me know.
Well, I would agree that while engineering is a laudable profession, you can have too much of a good thing. And in the West, for example, senior ministers are often lawyers or have a legal background. Senior deputy ministers are in the United States and Great Britain and France and Canada, Australia, tend to be economists, I would bet. You can always have too much of a good thing. So I'm not suggesting that any one profession is better than another, but rather I agree that a mix of knowledge is much better than having people who are employed in a particular field, well-educated, and cannot find work. That is the coming together of people from quite different perspectives and educational training that makes an exciting society.
Thank you. And this question is for you, Mr. Tierney. As we know, you have signed partnerships with the government of Iraq to work on a number of projects, and you also collaborated with UNDP on projects related to governance, sustainable development. Could you please share with us one of the most successful projects you've worked on?
It's hard to pick just one, of course, because we're always successful.
Absolutely.
And modest. But I think the recently passed law by Parliament on the new public financial management law is a good example of where we help bring parliamentarians together with provincial representatives, and we had a big workshop in Suleimania, and so the regional officials were able to comment on the law. We also brought the parliamentary committee to Canada as part of their development process, not because Canada has the best public finance management law by any stretch, but rather just to show a difference in approaches, and that by showing two different types of approaches, one can then find a better approach that combines various elements. So that was, I think, a good example of the coaching and learning by doing, because all of our development work was done as they drafted the law.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm gonna open the floor now for questions. So please do raise your hands if you have a question. Please. Could somebody please give the lady the mic?
Well, thank you for the great presentations. I'm not saying not more than that, but I was wondering about the education, sociology, and stuff abroad. Why don't we develop our sociology studies here in Iraq? Like just one suggestion. And how about the gender studies? We don't have any gender studies in Iraq. We don't have people who are gender specialists, although we have conflict areas, we have like tons of gender jobs require people with gender expertise. So how about this stuff? Like gender education, you can go to schools, you can integrate it through the curriculum of the schools, and you can train the people since the elementary school on gender equality and women's rights, gender rights, whatever. But then also you need people who work in the gender field, you need people who deal with gender issues, you need people as social workers, especially in the field of sociology and social sciences. We don't have social specialists, counselors, we don't have gender specialists, and we have like a hell of problems in Iraq, social, psychological, as you mentioned, Dr. Kadhim. So how about this? Is there any solution for this problem? Should we send people like 20, 30, 100 people every year to go abroad to study the social science in the USA or Canada or Europe, while we need more than that within the country, inside the country, people who deal with the social problems inside the country. Especially it affects women, children, the family, everything. Like we are dealing with a real and serious social problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to answer?
Sure, I will take a part of the question, and my colleagues, I'm sure, have other things to say. But one of the problems with the social sciences, these are a lot of times affected by the political environment in which they are being studied. And let's remember that until recently, Iraq has been a stifling dictatorship where you could not study most of the latest or even, even some of the old schools of economics, schools of political science, and others. It has been, as a student, you are spoon-fed a certain kind of an ideology. Also, one of the major things to have a successful doctorate program is a great library. And imagine trying to get books in Saddam's era on certain things that he did not prefer. So people who studied there out of no faults of their own were deprived of the full scope of what a graduate student would have at any American or European university. And that affected the quality of the output. Many professors and also graduate students, friends of mine, they did their own kind of outreach, and they did sort of a lot of self-education. We have some great examples in Iraq of people who studied here and are no less than any other graduate, if not better. So that's a problem, and in order to sort of make the difference, you need to send people out. Also, one of the impediments of Iraqi higher education, and both in the bachelor degree and also in the postgraduate, is the lack of stress and emphasis on languages. So, and I believe that one thing, if I were to advise the Iraqi educational system, is to mandate a full command of a second language as a mandatory thing. I mean, we don't want to do something like, I went to University of California, Berkeley, where they required 5 languages in the department. I said, you have to pass those before you get your qualifying exams. We don't want 5 languages. Let's do 2, Arabic and another European language. And that would be important. This way, you don't even need to send people out to get the cutting edge research and education. But we have people who don't have the linguistic abilities, so they are at the mercy of translation, which normally gives them something that was done 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, rather than getting it immediately fresh out of the press. And I can say more, but I'd rather stop and have other colleagues say something.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kadem. Mr. Tierney, would you like to comment on the question? To Dr. Malnex?
I'll
then?
pass.
Okay, sure.
I think it's a very interesting question, and it comes back, I think, to broadening the base of education in Iraq. You're talking about gender studies, talk about psychology, sociology. I don't know if those programs even exist. And from everything I've been here, I was founding president of the American University of Kurdistan, so I was there for two and a half years, and I've been here for 2 years, so almost 5 years in Iraq. And I'm a guest here, so I don't mean this to sound overly critical, but the K-12 educational system is destroyed. It needs to be totally transformed. You have students, for example, that are studying English for 12 years. They graduate from high school, they can't speak any English. How could this be? How can this possibly be? I think a large part of it is the way that teachers teach. It's the old traditional, I am the teacher, here is the podium, I am imparting knowledge, you will regurgitate the knowledge. It is not at all any sort of learning together. It's just a sort of almost a dictatorial type of style of teaching. It's 50 years outdated. We need to transform K-12 education in Iraq. I cut this one paragraph out when I was speaking because I think I was running too long. Let me just read it though now. It is time to bring home the thousands upon thousands of students whose families feel the necessity to send them abroad for a university education. The brain drain has to stop. Students have the right to the highest possible education in Iraq. We want them to stay here, to live here, keeping their talent at home in order to build a strong and vibrant economy. With that in mind, we need to develop a robust and challenging curriculum featuring innovative academic programs, such as the ones you mentioned, with performance indicators and student assessment outcomes very clearly articulated.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malnex. Anyone else? Please, Minister of Electricity, Dr. Lu'ay Al-Khatib.
I would like to thank the organizers for dedicating special day on technology and education. I think this theme is very much missed in many forums or conferences. It is the very topic that shapes the future of any country. If we are serious about defining a robust economy, a stable future, and an intelligent society. It's about time that people in Iraq, our people, to think differently about education. As you rightly said, Dr. Malnex, about the priorities and the classes of like which degrees is better and what kind of like, whether it's medical doctors or engineers, etc., whatever, leaving business and policymakers to the least. Hence, we left with significant voids to deal with when it comes to shaping policies and delivering good governance. Iraq needs to revolutionize education. And for this to happen, we really need to employ the principles of knowledge economy wisely in a way that contributes directly to the capacity building of our society. For companies to move forward, eventually they will have to rely on local content. And that local content need to be kind of like cherry-picked and well prepared to deliver a world-class projects. And with that, we need to think of employable skills and not the usual trends that our education establishments have thrived in the past decades. We have to depart classic and past thinking to deliver new results that comply and goes in tandem with future development. That's if we are thinking of an Iraq that competes at not only regional level but international levels. So when we talk about like defining programs, education programs, defining a prosperous, education programs that really define a prosperous future, it has to basically goes into like different wavelengths from those of past practices. It's about time that existing educational platforms and institutions to aggressively engage with world-class institutions to do twinning programs, delivering in-country projects and in-country programs as opposed to sending people outside. Yes, sending people outside is needed to capture these special skills, but the excuse of like securities or whatever, it's gone. Today, Iraq is completely different from the Iraq 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's about time that these programs to be established here by registering a presence of these international institutions to be here in Iraq and participate side by side with Iraqi institutions. Of course, our institutions need significant guidance and support, but this is part of the journey, and I'm sure that the multinational community will think out of the box and identify better solutions as they progress in delivering these mega projects and delivering reconstruction campaigns that worth in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loel Khatib. I think, would you like to comment, Dr. Kadem, please?
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this really eloquent capturing of what the crux of what we are trying to accomplish here. But I think, if we were to think about sending people abroad, it just goes back to the way we established our education. When Iraq decided to build a university or to establish a university, there were colleges before that as well. Initially, all of the professors were foreigners. And then what the Iraqis did were either had some of their students study with these foreign professors or send people abroad to get degrees and come back. And with little by little, there was a replacement of foreigners by Iraqis with similar or very close standards to what was out there. The problem with our universities now are probably similar, not as bad as it was in the 1930s and 40s, but similar because we have, after the 1990s, Iraq was completely cut from the rest of the world. And as I said, the deficit in linguistic capabilities in our higher education systems don't allow that access to what is the cutting edge research and technologies in education that are out there in the world. So sending people is the temporary mechanism that you could really have this in order to revitalize the cycle of education and injecting new blood and fresh ideas. As you well know, and you are one of the people who had education in the West, most of the universities in the West, they don't hire their graduates. You graduate in one university, you have to go seek employment elsewhere, and maybe after a few years you can be hired back by the university. The idea is really to have a healthy circulation of knowledge. We have been doing one thing which is really not done anywhere else, which is people study, teach, study higher, teach, study higher, and teach in the same university. They don't move more than 2 offices away from where they started. And that does not really bring any circulation of knowledge or any innovation. And it is important to send people, but yes, with the goal of having capable universities, as you just mentioned, basically to graduate students who are able to do it, and maybe the circulation will be within Iraqi universities. Now, when I was in university, we had 5 universities. Now we have up to 40 universities. That, and also raising the standards, and that is very important because you need to have universities, and and once you have now something like the American University in Baghdad and others, you could really again measure your universities to that level. and then raising the standards and having those temporary solutions before you really can speak of an education that is self-sustained within the country.
Thank you very much. We have another question. Okay. 2 questions. Okay. And if you could please keep them questions, instead of statements so that we can finish on time. Thank you very much.
Waqas, I am from Pakistan Embassy, Baghdad. So I have a question and comments as well. So theme of today's discussion was knowledge economy and then sustainable development. But when we think in realistic terms, we see this sustainable development, practically what we see is that the sustainable development in the West and the developed countries, which are already developed, it is more focused. But at the same time, it is the responsibility of these developed countries that countries which are developing and which are least developed, because this concept of sustainable development should be a holistic concept, and it should be for all the countries. If West wants that their maximum exports should be to these countries, why don't they think that there should be a transfer of technology to these countries as well? And there should be transfer of knowledge to these countries. If suppose they want that their trade should increase, their exports should increase. So at the same time, it is their responsibility, it is their, I can say, moral obligation that they should also contribute, because if one country is less developed or least developed, it will impact the whole world. So they should also contribute in that sense, that they should come forward for transfer of technology. They should offer maximum scholarships. If you are exporting too much goods to such countries and you are getting too much revenue, why don't you offer scholarship to those to students of those countries? So these should also be there, and then these universities should establish their campuses, their sub-campuses in such countries, so that they can also improve themselves and they can also contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I take yeah, please. Yeah, that's better, yeah.
Okay, I'll basically continue on the discussions that was happening, and mainly on Dr. Luhay Al-Khatib comment.
Could you please just raise your voice? Yeah, thank you.
About the transformational impact, how can we measure the impact that we will receive from various ideas we learned today about having an international institute in the country, only one international institute, and sending people out? And do you think that partnering for Dr. Abbas, partnering with international experts or getting more experts to the local institutes could help in making the change, because you allow exposure to more people in the country, or not?
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm gonna, who would like to go first? Dr. Kadam? Yeah.
All right, I will take those. Let me start from the second question. It's very important to link Iraqi institutions to Western institutions and other institutions, not necessarily in the West. And this is the only way right now that really you could make sure that you are well connected and you are current with what is out there in the world. There is no excuse anymore because everything now is instant. You could have information moved around the world in a matter of seconds, and you could have virtual conferences and panels. This entire forum could have been done in several rooms around the world, and you could really have that done. The problem with it, again, is you need an infrastructure for that, and one of the things that are important in the pillars of knowledge-based economy has to do with the infrastructure. It's not enough to talk about knowledge, but the infrastructure that allows the creation and the flow of this knowledge between the consumers and the generators or the creators. I just go back to the thing that I can never get tired of emphasizing: language. How can you link in a think tank in Baghdad or in Basra with something in Japan or in Washington in the United States or in France if the language is not there? You know, we produce a lot of good research here in Iraq. Problem is that they write it in Arabic. And people, a lot of it is about things that will be dated 2, 3, 4 days. To translate it, you need sometimes weeks, if not months. And that's why we see, we are in Washington, we don't see any research that quotes a line or two from something that is done here in Iraq. That's why there is an advantage for institutions in Doha, in Beirut, in Cairo, and several other capitals in the region. Many of the people who work in them, by the way, are Iraqis. And because we do not have an institution, a research think tank that really does this kind of work. Language is important, and also the capacity. There are many people, many colleagues who work very well. There are some good stories that we see are developing recently, and we hope more of it. But it is important really to link that you have many cases now between universities. You need to have visitors programs that are there. You know, we have a great story at the University of Kufa with the UNESCO chair, where they hosted people from the United States, from Canada, from other countries, Europe also, would go there and teach for 2, 3 months as top experts, and they did that work. So you could do that, but again, it needs heavy sponsorship from these institutions and, quite frankly, from the government as well to facilitate that kind of this, and also allowing people to go on temporary basis to the West and get that kind of teamwork. Classes that are taught by professors from different universities. You learn, not just students learn from professors, but also professors learn from each other when they teach a class in one of those universities in Iraq and elsewhere. So there is a lot. You need to have an infrastructure for that kind of linkage before you make the decision. And then, of course, the decision is important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas Kadim, Dr. Michael Molnax, and Mr. Steve Tierney. We have to wrap up this session. I'm gonna just end it by saying, by repeating 2 statements that were shared with us today. Iraq is rebuilding itself. Iraq needs to revolutionize education, and as Dr. Molnax said, the brain drain needs to stop. So I'm gonna leave you here. Thank you very much to my panelists, and you can go and enjoy lunch now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will go for lunch now. We're returning back in 1 hour, so hopefully everybody will be back here at 3 p.m. Thank you very much. السيدات والسادة الحضور، سنذهب لاستراحة الغداء ونعود في الساعة 3، حيث عند عودتنا سيأتي معالي وزير الثقافة بالإضافة إلى مجموعة أخرى من المتحدثين من ضمنهم السفيرين الهولندي والكندي. شكرا جزيلا.